Testing the microphone.
Testing the microphone.
Dialed. Okay, I just filmed a video downstairs. This is the first time I've done an intro segment, perhaps unnecessary intro, after filming the main part of the video. But downstairs, I just gave a short overview of what we call the North American Cordillera. The main purpose of this video is to hopefully show some aspiring geologists or people considering studying geology the kinds of knowledge that you just organically get as a result of pursuing geology, first in your bachelor's, but really cementing some of these ideas in tectonic landscapes in graduate school. And so I gave a brief overview of the system on the whiteboard downstairs. Maybe not my highest production quality, but I'm capitalizing on finding a little bit of time and motivation to do some YouTube content. But yeah, it's 108 degrees. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Check this out. It looks nice, but looks can be deceiving. Yeah, without further ado, here is some geology downstairs, and I hope everyone's having a nice summer. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao. All right, testing the microphone. Testing the microphone. Here we are in a very dark room on the campus of the University of Arizona. What is it like to be a geologist? What is it like to have even a basic understanding of this landscape that we see on the board here? This is just a Google Earth image of the western United States in the context of tectonics or the study of plate tectonics. We refer to this landscape broadly as the North American Cordillera. I'm cutting off, obviously, North America up into Canada as well, down into Mexico a little bit. But the purpose here is going to be hopefully show you one of the reasons why it is so badass to be a geologist and to have an understanding of these landscapes. And I have 5 markers here. I'm not going to use any color scheme in particular, but what my goal here today is to just outline a few of the main tectonic features, mountain ranges, styles of structures, geologic structures that is, in the western US. I should say that I haven't done any preparation for this other than, I guess, 10 years of college, but this is all off the dome. So it's hopefully going to be a demonstration of the kinds of knowledge base that you build up when you really dedicate yourself to this craft. And disclaimer, I'm not going to hit everything. Obviously, it's an incredibly complex system, and there's a lot of people who know a lot more than I do about the system. But just to show you like where I am and where you could be someday if you're trying to become a geologist. Let's start in the ocean. Why not? We see some interesting features in the oceanic crust out here. Out here we have the Juan de Fuca. This is a remnant of the Farallon slab, which subducted underneath Western North America. That is a subduction zone. Down here we have the Mendocino Triple Junction, and we have all sorts of interesting transform faults. Down here we have the Gorda plate, or maybe people call it a microplate, I don't know. Okay, we have a subduction zone on there. We have some oceanic features, very broadly speaking. The subduction zone terminates here, interestingly, and then something many of you probably have heard of is this immense strike-slip system, dextral strike-slip system, known as the San Andreas Fault. That comes down and cuts through Southern California here. Interesting feature. I'm not going to go into what these things really mean, but while we're on the West Coast, let's go up to the Cascades. These little white dots, just off the top of my head, I know that these are the Cascade Volcanic Arc. We'll just call it Cascade Volcanic Arc for there. That's an active volcanic arc, mountains like Rainier and Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, etc. So that's interesting. And I'm really just going to fill this in as I see fit with some of my favorite features. We have a lot of geology, sadly blanketed, I'm doing very broad extents here, by the Columbia River flood basalts. A lot of interesting geology in that region that is both there in the basalts themselves, but also buried underneath it, much to the disappointment of people who are curious about that. While we're in one of my favorite realms in the entire western US, we'll come down here, boom. What I'm marking out here, we'll leave the Uintas out of it for now, but what I'm marking out here approximately is what we would refer to as the severe thrust front. Canada is up here. This is Montana, so we'll just put Montana there for us. This is a thin-skinned fold thrust belt. So here we have the Wyoming salient. These are a bunch of imbricated thrust sheets. It's a major feature and I've approximated this. It terminates somewhere down here in southern Nevada, but that is the almighty severe thrust belt. Let's just call it that for now. In black. And that's interesting. We have some interesting features here. We have the Wyoming salient. There are a series of, and up here we have the Helena salient. A series of salients and reentrants in the severe fold thrust belt. So we're kind of filling in some stuff here, interesting. One thing that a big feature of cordilleran systems is the magmatic arc. So we're going to come down here into the Sierra Nevada, broadly speaking, dominated by granites, you may know if you've been there. So there we have the Sierra Nevada batholith, as we call it. It's obviously distributed up through here. This whole landscape has been extended, but if we continue that arc, generally speaking, up into Wyoming, Montana, we have that northern segment of the magmatic arc, the Idaho batholith. My Helena salient annotation is covering up the Boulder batholith here in western Montana. Very nice. Those are granites mostly that have a magmatic arc. They were generated by the magmatic arc. That is to say that they're the result of the subduction of oceanic lithosphere. This is now a transformed margin, as I said, but we can keep in mind that there was subduction of Farallon oceanic lithosphere in approximately that orientation that created this full thrust belt as well as the magmatic arcs. So that's interesting. I'm really jumping around a lot here, but I guess one thing I could add, there's a hinterland here, as we call it. There's a lot of thrust faults that have also been reactivated as normal faults all through, around the Montana-Idaho border, and then down in Utah, places like the Canyon Range, places in here where there are thrust systems that are complexly deformed as a result of later extension. And while we're on the topic of extension, let's just come in here and I'll do a very broad overview of this area. Just, wow, very broad. But basin and range extension, you've probably heard of this. You maybe read John McPhee's book, Basin and Range, some popular geologic literature. These repeated mountain ranges and intervening valleys. This is an extensional landscape. So at one point, the western US was not nearly as wide as it is today. There was a very broad and high orogenic plateau, the Nevada Plano as we call it, that underwent extensional collapse later in its history. So these are normal faults, a lot of normal faults, and I'm not going to annotate them all. And those normal faults continue, these various phases of Paleogene extension and basin and range extension affected a lot of the real estate to the north as well. And I might have jumped the gun because we have another very interesting feature, I guess, that are near and dear to my heart. Those are metamorphic core complexes. Metamorphic core complexes trace approximately the extent of that over-thickened crust. Shout out to Pete Coney and Tekla Harms, 1984 publication that kind of showed how over-thickened crust may be the explanation for something like gravitational instability and the subsequent collapse of this orogenic belt. In western Utah and eastern Nevada, I don't really have the resolution. We have many more core complexes. So MCC, there's like 20 or more of these things. If you come all the way down to where I'm currently working, I can barely see it. There's the Catalinas and the Rincons. Those are core complexes. And then there's a bunch of core complexes in this corridor up towards Southern California. So let's just refer to those. Those are all approximate locations of metamorphic core complexes. Interesting questions arise that we won't get into. But another thing we can talk about, it's kind of interesting, is the Colorado Plateau. I see the Mogollon Rim here, the Arizona Transition Zone, and this broad area known as the Colorado Plateau. Colorado Plateau, as one of my idols, George Davis, once put it, it is an island of competence within a sea of strain. Very mysteriously has undergone not very much shortening, unlike a lot of these portions of the severe orogenic or severe fold and thrust belt that have hundreds of kilometers of crustal shortening. The Colorado Plateau is an enigma. Okay. Speaking of structural geology and deformation, let's talk about some laramide uplifts, huh? We'll do it in red. Or I'll do it in blue. Where I'm currently working, one of the places, the Little Belt Mountains. I love you. Little Belt Mountains, laramide uplift, and I'm just going to go down. We have the big snowies up here in central Montana. Out here we have the beautiful Bighorn. We have the Wind Rivers here. Way out here, we have the Black Hills of South Dakota. Let's throw the Uinta in here, juxtaposed with the thrust belt. Those are the Uinta. And then in the southwest Montana zone, we have the Beartooths here, we have the Gallatin-Madison Range, we have the Ruby Range, the Gravelies, etc. Generally speaking, we can use the Wind Rivers here as an example. I'll just extend this symbology. Big reverse faults that exhumed Precambrian basement. So this is generally referred to as the Laramide Province. The Laramide Province. I'm realizing that maybe you can't see any of this, and that's okay. I'll just delete this video. So yeah, this is very interesting. People study the transition from what we would refer to as thin-skinned thrusting in the fold thrust belt to reverse fault bound basement chord uplifts of the Laramide Province. It's beautiful. These are also referred to as intraforeland uplifts, and this is a big one. Out here, and I'll maybe change to green here. Out here, generally, let's just call it the cordilleran foreland basin system. Shout out to Pete DeSalle and many other people who have worked on this system. This is the general term for the retroarc, or in this case, east of the fold thrust belt. There is a predictable arrangement of sedimentary rocks that accumulate during deformation and shortening and resulting flexure in the fold thrust belt. So the foreland basin system has been dissected or ruptured by basement chord uplifts. Wonderful. There's a lot of other stuff in here. I'm going to end up missing a lot, but I don't want to take too much time here. We have the Great Valley forearc basin as opposed to a retroarc. these rocks accumulated, or as sediments that turned into rocks accumulated in this orientation to the west of the magmatic arc. So the Great Valley Forearc is to the west of the Sierra Nevada, southwest, I suppose. And there are interesting ways to look at the composition of the rocks to gain insight beyond their geography, geographic location, to discriminate between these different kinds of depositional systems or sedimentary basins generally. Shout out to my buddy Jordan Wong, who knows a lot more about this than me, the Franciscan complex, Franciscan melange. I should do it in blue, but the Franciscan melange, this is Franciscan melange stuff that got caught up in the subduction zone, a very complicated and jumbled assortment of rocks that are smashed up against the western margin of North America in its modern extent. I've never actually seen those rocks, that's why it sounds like I don't know anything about them, which is fair. So the Franciscan melange, that's cool. There's other features, I guess when we're talking about the western US, the discrimination between accreted terrains and the boundary of the craton, this is going to be very generalized, but there's this thing known as the 706 line. This is the strontium 706 line. This is a geochemical or isotopic system that has been used to discriminate between the boundary of very old cratonic North American lithosphere and a bunch of terrains that were accreted to the west. And I won't get into the details of that, but it's important when we're thinking about the long-term construction of this mountain belt. And yeah, that's interesting. One thing that comes to mind here is this interesting and not super well understood, but people are working on it, potential accreted oceanic plateau known as Silesia. Very cool stuff. This is basalt, a hypothesized oceanic plateau that accreted to basically where the modern Cascades are. And I've written a little bit about that in my own work, so it's kind of cool. This thrust belt, I should say, it obviously extends up into Canada. There's a wonderful thrust system that's pretty well understood up there in Canada. Yeah, the Colorado Plateau, I guess, when we're talking about laramide uplifts, I kind of just didn't include the front range of Colorado. That's all basement that has been exhumed out there by, I've actually never even been there, I don't know, Denver, Boulder area, and various other places. Kind of cool. I've missed a lot of structures in here, but the general vibe is here. This system is equally complex to the north and south. The oceanic stuff I really glossed over there, but I could just keep going on. And kind of one of the last things I think of that's kind of interesting is I just know that a lot of these rocks out here in what I've labeled as the Foreland Basin system, I just know from working in Montana, these are a lot of Cretaceous rocks. And when I think of that and when I think about where those rocks came from, I envision the Western Interior Cretaceous Seaway, the WICS. And this was during a marine transgression. This was actually a seaway that connected the Arctic with the Gulf of Mexico. So there was an ocean right here. I shouldn't say ocean, I should say Western Interior Cretaceous Seaway. So that's kind of cool to envision. And I could go on for a long time, but that is a general overview. Like, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and the point of doing this, and I'll turn the lights off and show you something, but kind of the main point I want to make here is that a reason why it's really, really cool to study geology is because if you really dedicate yourself to this craft and you see maps, this is what you are projecting onto it. And it gives you just like such a crazy, deep understanding of the different landforms and how they came to be. The last thing I'll say on this point is that that's just plan view, right? This is just looking at the map. And so we have to think about this three-dimensionally. What's it look like as we go down into the crust, as we create two-dimensional cross sections? So I'm just going to turn off the satellite imagery here. I'm just going to kill this projector, and we're going to look at this little creation here. Like I said, I didn't really cover even half of the important stuff here, and look at what we did on the board, right? And so it's just one of, like I said, geology is just so beautiful because when I'm flying, or other people who have studied geology are flying from, let's say, Tucson to Missoula, Montana, you're seeing these features, and it absolutely changes your perspective on life on Earth. And so all of that is to say, let me pull up a chair. I know that was a long video, and excuse I look like I'm like going to the gas station the way I'm dressed right now, but all of that is to say that if you're thinking about studying geology, hopefully this is kind of cool, because if you just work on it, you'll someday see the Earth like this, and you'll understand all of those ridiculous words that I used. And I wasn't that articulate, but this is just an idea I had this morning. Maybe not my highest production quality, but it's a really beautiful science. And this is just the Western US. People, when I look at the South Central Andes, similar things, similar understandings of the orogenic system are there. And other people who work all over the world, whether it's the Carpathians working in Romania, or South Central Tibet, or Burma, or whatever. The same thing applies. We have decent understandings of these things. So, if you're thinking about studying geology, do it. And thank you for listening. I hope you guys have a great day. Stay hydrated. Peace.